What's up, fight fans? This is Kurt DeVille with Counterpunch Boxing News, and I have some new news concerning Lennox Lewis. Big up England, big up Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. Get this. Anthony Joshua versus Deontay Wilder. Lennox Lewis makes his prediction. Anthony Joshua looks to be set to be going head-to-head with Tyson Fury this year, as the prospect of an undisputed heavyweight championship of the world edges closer to becoming reality, the feature not achieved since 2002. 2 decades ago is the Brit, which that is flawed, and I'll counterpunch. The 2 decades was the British icon Lennox Lewis, who became the undisputed heavyweight champion, seeing the world with the Lion still keeping his name in the sport by committing on boxing. Okay. And Lennox Lewis talking about the outcome of that potential fight. And Lennox Lewis isn't convinced that the Brit would be able to get the win against, and has backed the American to get the better of him, saying definitely Wilder. Wilder has the thing in him where he wants to hurt you, and every time he throws that right hand, he's trying to damage with it. He's throwing it to land. He's throwing it with emphasis. The pair are still to take on each other, with the fight not happening when they both were champions, although Eddie Hearn claims they have tried recently to get the fight booked, but Wilder's agent Shelley Finkel has not responded. Those are the words of Lennox Lewis. Let me counterpunch. First off, that is not for undisputed. If Tyson Fury versus Anthony Joshua, like this article says, okay, so counterpunching the author of this article, it would be for the WBC, and that's it. It would be for the Ring Magazine. No, the Ring Magazine is not even up for grabs either, because he let that belt go. So it would be for the WBC, something that Anthony Joshua has never fought for. Okay, not the undisputed. The undisputed, you know, if anyone is closer to being undisputed, is Alexander Usyk. But he can't be undisputed without the WBC belt. Okay, so back to Lennox Lewis, though. Bars. I think that Lennox Lewis picking Deontay Wilder to beat Anthony Joshua. I must remind you guys that Lennox Lewis 4 years ago made a prediction that Anthony Joshua would beat Deontay Wilder. But I think what happened with Lewis, he's seen the fact of these two and what they are willing to do. Wilder's willing to die, get knocked out, hauled out in the gurney. Goodbye. Bars. Joshua is willing to coast or to not look as determined. Okay? And I think that's why Lennox Lewis changed his mind based on the two attributes. But these are two different fighters. And they were fighting two different other fighters. They weren't fighting the same guy, so we have really nothing to reference that to. Because as far as the two goes, Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua, they've only fought Dominic Brazil and I forget his name. Mexican-American fighter, right? And those are the only two that he's fought. They fought together. And I'm looking at those. That's really not a good reference at all. And we don't really know how those two would act. I think Joshua would have an easier time versus what he had to deal with for 24 rounds and 2 fights with Alexander Usyk. A smaller, quicker, tricky fighter with all this gifted athletic ability and skill. Okay, and dynamic ring IQ. But then again, Deontay Wilder had a similar struggle and challenge with Tyson Fury. He's just a bigger guy that moves really fast for his size and has a high ring IQ. So the question is, we're basically predicting, in what Lewis is, we're predicting to the guys that lost. Okay, so these are the two guys that are below on the bottom shelf right now, under the guys that are on the top, Usyk and Tyson Fury. Okay, and Lennox Lewis, I think he's picking him because of what he's seen. And I can understand that. I can understand Lennox Lewis picking Wilder over Joshua because, see, Wilder is going to at least try to make the knockout, which we've seen lackluster performances. Okay, but even with Wilder, though, fighting someone like Tyson Fury, I don't think Tyson Fury is tricky or more defensively sound than Usyk. I just don't. I think Usyk's a better defensive fighter. I think Tyson Fury has good defense, but I don't think it's as good as Alexander Usyk's being the smaller guy that always constantly moves his head. Tyson Fury doesn't have that type of, a formation when he moves. It's not even really in his tone. He can move and rubberneck and all that good stuff because we've seen it in the Swords fight. We've seen it in the first Wilder fight. We've seen it in a lot of fights. The Dillian White fight, he looks quite impressive, but those are against guys that don't have a lot of skill. They're having limited repertoire. What I was mostly impressed with Tyson Fury was his fight with Vladimir Klitschko, because Vladimir had them all, but Vladimir had this kind of tentative mindset, kind of like how Anthony Joshua was. But nonetheless, Joshua does have a better arsenal than Wilder. Now, to be fair, I've seen Wilder improve on the left hook. He's kind of turning it in. He's turning it in. I don't think he's turning it all the way over, to get his body behind it. But it's looking a lot better than they looked before. Before he's kind of like throwing like he's slinging something as opposed to putting his body into it. You know what I mean? Those shoulders, all that body, that God-given strength that he has. I don't think that he's throwing it properly to enforce that. But I think between the two, because these are basically four different guys, but these two guys had different challenges. Okay, they haven't had the same challenges. So with Lennox Lewis saying, hey, I think that Deontay Wilder beats Joshua, I think he's off a bit because he's failing to realize that these guys are on two different levels and they were fighting two different guys. And the reason Joshua looked the way he looked simply because of the opponent that he was in front of him. I don't believe in looking at Wilder and seeing Wilder going for the KO. I could say, and you could argue that he may have more heart. I wouldn't argue that because Wilder, again, is willing to die. But does he have more skill than Joshua? Listen, there's a reason why Joshua didn't get knocked out. Okay? Because that 12th round, he was getting hit with shots. But what was he doing? He was getting out of the hell out of the way. It was almost like bees, like a cloud of bees was following him. But he knew instinctively, let me move that head. Why? Because he's know what it's like to get swung and stole on. Okay? And get an arsenal of punches placed upon him, just like in the Andy Ruiz fight. Okay, and he didn't do that then. And he just put his arms up and got fucking destroyed. Why? And then versus, if you fast forward, you see him moving that head. You know what I mean? So it's a difference when you're talking about guys that had different challenges, because Usyk hasn't fought Wilder and Joshua hasn't fought Fury. So there's no way of knowing that. Okay, so I'm going to take an agnostic approach towards that matter because we just don't know. But I think if Joshua fights Wilder and he's able to hit Wilder, I think that's a type of fight he's more comfortable with. But the question is Wilder able to hit AJ? And the rest is history. You guys tell me what you think of Lennox Lewis's prediction on Anthony Joshua taking on Deontay Wilder. Of course, please subscribe. And you guys been Counterpunch. Peace!